I am being watched. Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 1, Episode 21. It's called Many Happy Returns. So spoilers for the episode. It's a big one. We're getting towards the end of the season, and this picks up on the tease of what was going to happen to Jessica in the backstory last episode, and kind of finishes that stuff off and ties in pretty nicely with sort of where Reese was at the start of the show. There's a new case, there's a new person of interest, but Finch lies about it and doesn't tell Reese and tries to initially get Carter to work with them, but then realizes she's better served elsewhere and ends up working with Fusco, at least to begin with, until Reese sort of shoehorns his way back into the main plot, as it were. Whereas Carter goes off and investigates stuff related to Reese with the FBI and discovers some things about him that way, and that all ties into the main story as well. Yeah, the big thing here is that Jessica, it turns out, was killed by her husband, who I think was called Peter, I want to say. He seemingly had a gambling problem. He was this kind of quintessential nice in public but a monster at home, this abusive kind of husband. And I think there's a really great scene once Reese is aware of the plan and what's going on, where Finch confesses that before he got Reese and before he started actually working on the cases, one of the things that kept coming up was that some people's numbers would come up over and over again until they eventually died. Even before we get to the specifics of that, it is kind of interesting to think that, yeah, before Reese and Finch went out and put a stop to whatever was causing the numbers, it makes sense that not all of them would pan out to a death. You know, like, just because someone's planning to kill someone or there's a high likelihood of it doesn't mean that it's always going to happen. But there's a chance that it'll crop up again in the not too distant future. And Finch explains that most of these repeating numbers tended to be women. Not all of them, but most of them. And it was this idea that they were living with abusive husbands who were on the verge of possibly killing them and eventually would down the line. And of course the question comes up by the end of the episode if Jessica was one of those numbers. And the end clearly shows that she indeed was, because it reveals that Finch was at the hospital and bumps into Reese. Reese doesn't even see him. He just bumps into him, and Finch, says, "Sorry, I'm so sorry." And that's kind of like the emotional sort of moment that we end the episode on. It's a very good episode. It has one minor nitpick. That's not a big deal at all, but I have to mention the dodgy looking beard and the flashbacks on Reese. I get that they wanted to show that this was the start of the beard growing that he had at the start of the show, but it's I feel like back in the standard definition days you could get away with fake beards and things a lot more, but especially short ones that look pretty fake. I mean, it looked fake anyway to me. If you tell me this is his real hair growing out, then the dude grows a really bad beard. But it looked pretty fake to me. But that's it. If that's my only critique, then we're in a pretty good time here. It really plays with the ideas that Reese might go too far because he went through this experience where the woman he loved was murdered by an abusive husband, and the question comes up in this episode because that abusive husband, Peter, has been missing pretty much since she died. Like I think they said 2 months after the car accident, which was the official story that killed her, he disappeared. So it's kind of like brought up throughout this episode that maybe Reese killed him before the start of the show, and that's a big question that sort of lingers until the end of the episode. And we don't get like a definitive answer, but we get a pretty likely answer that he didn't by the end, because the other big thing is, like, is Reese going to kill this guy, this abusive husband? Carter tries to stop him and says she can't just let him execute people. And I thought this was interesting because a big part of this show, especially since Carter's become more involved with working with Reese, is this idea with her being able to sort of accept that he's working outside the system and accept what he's doing, and every so often be kind of reassured that he has good morals, or he has a good line that he doesn't cross, or that he does the right thing. the end of this episode is the reveal to her that Reese has not killed this abusive husband in this episode. He's actually taken him to a prison outside of the country. I think Mexico. So it sounded Mexican anyway, the name of the prison, they said. He's like, yeah, you were the original arresting officer. This marshal that brought him in told us to contact you and let him know that we had him in custody. And this is a relief to Carter. But Carter also asks, do you have any other Americans in your custody? And he says, yeah, one or two. And that implication there is that, yeah, probably Jessica's husband is also serving time in this prison. So, bending the rules a bit. It's not like they went through a trial, obviously, but he didn't just straight up execute them. And one of the fascinating things about this to me is I was thinking back to episode 4, I think it was, with Linda Cardinelli, where it was the sister trying to get revenge for, well, her sister. You know, the woman who was trying to get revenge for her sister. And the episode ended with that very sort of ambiguous moment of whether or not Reese killed this man. Like, you know, he wasn't going to let her lose her soul by killing him, but he's already kind of lost his soul, so he's maybe more willing to do it. And it ended without showing as if he actually did, right? That was a big episode. We talked about that being a great ending. And I was thinking throughout this episode that, you know, we're playing this card of like, Finch and Carter don't want Reese to go too far and actually murder this man because it would be in cold blood. And I was thinking, well, the show's already kind of given us an ambiguous ending before where he might have done that. So it's kind of interesting to bring that up. And I'm not necessarily saying it would be a mistake to do that, but it's interesting that these other characters don't seem to be aware of what that outcome was. But I do, and we do as the audience. So I think it's interesting because I was a little worried that by the end, that maybe if it shows him go through with this or it shows him not go through with it, maybe it would give us too much of a definitive answer about that earlier episode, or at the very least it would take away the ambiguity and make it feel less powerful. I think by the end I was very satisfied though with thinking of that episode, because that line at the end, there's one or two more Americans in this prison, it leaves the possibility that one of them, when he says one or two, one is the husband and the other one might be that guy from that episode. But doesn't confirm anything, doesn't completely rule anything out. But I think I like it more than I think that I'm thinking about it, because it almost felt like that episode was a setup for this episode. That ending, that ambiguous ending of maybe he'll go too far without any intervention is there. And then this episode is supposed to be, okay, now the other characters are aware of what he's going to do, and it's setting up that this is a line that he shouldn't cross. Yeah, obviously he does kill people all the time, but he does it in, moments of self-defense when there's no other choice. The usual reasons why it doesn't seem like a bad thing. I feel like by setting that question up with that ambiguous ending way back in episode 4, and then giving us this episode just a couple away from the end of the season, it does feel like it's kind of tying a neat bow in kind of Reese's character journey for this season. There's a few things in this episode that actually feel like that, but that's the big one for me, is sort of linking that back to that and giving us kind of an answer of what he maybe did after those credits started back in episode 4, but not confirming it outright. Just giving us a sense that he's probably there. He probably didn't kill him, he probably took him to this prison. I think that's neat. And they don't bring it up, they don't talk about that episode. I'm talking about that episode because I was thinking about that and how it ties into this episode thematically, and about this idea of him just killing someone who's bad when he doesn't have to, out of, a sense of revenge or anger or whatever it may be. So, yeah, that stuff was really interesting to think about and talk about, I think, with this episode. Also, Finch and Reese, their relationship, I think, has been progressing so wonderfully this season. This episode opens with Finch revealing that he knows that Reese has a birthday and gives him a present. He says, hey, why don't you go take the day off? There's no number. That's not true, of course, we find out quite quickly. But he's like, there's no number. Go and do whatever you do when you're not here. And Reese says, well, don't you already know what that is? And he's like, no, I respect others' privacy. And then Reese holds up the little birthday gift. He's like, yeah, clearly. So, they've been checking each other out throughout the show, right? Well, Reese had Fusco following Finch at one point. Finch knows things about Reese. They've been both keeping tabs on each other, trying to figure each other out. It's kind of a weird, warped way of like a bromance forming, but it's kind of worked in its own magical way. When we see Reese like spending just downtime early on in the episode, he's at a park playing chess with an old blind man, and he seems to be quite friendly with this old man, and he's talking about his birthday, and it's all very sweet and very innocent. And we see Reese is in this crappy little apartment. We've never really seen where Reese is living that much throughout this season, but he's got this crappy little studio apartment, and he's checking his phone, and there's no messages, and he feels restless, right? And then, of course, he later, after that, intervenes with the main plot and gets involved with everything. And I'll talk about the actual, specifics of the main plot a bit. But later on in the episode, when everything's said and done, they're having that heart-to-heart, looking across at the city, after Reese has dealt with the culprit of the episode, and he's sitting there with Finch, and he's asking, was Jessica one of those numbers? And Finch dodges the question and just says that we didn't do what we did when Jessica died, so there's nothing either of us could have done to prevent it. But this is where he finds out what the gift really was, because when he opens the box earlier, it's a key. But he gives him this address, and what the birthday gift actually seems to be is this nice big apartment. But the beautiful touch of it is that when Reese goes into the apartment and he's looking around and it's all very nice, he goes up to the window and he looks down and he can see the old man playing chess at the park that he was in earlier. And it's this beautiful little way of Finch letting him know that he does know what he does in his spare time, that he does is like, care about what he's doing. I don't know. I found it very sweet, and I think Reese's reaction felt like he found it sweet as well. He felt reassured that this person knows him and is looking out for him. He was upset obviously earlier on when he was kept out of the loop and he was lied to, but I think by the end of the episode he kind of appreciates that Finch did have his best interests at heart in some ways, even if lying to him was still ultimately a wrong choice, and that's debatable, I think, depending on your perspective. I think he understands what he was doing a bit better. So it's actually quite a sweet ending. This is the song that plays at the end when Carter's getting the information from the prison and Reese is getting the apartment and we get the final flashback. This all plays out to a song called Revenge by, I want to say, Danger Mouse and Sparkle Horse. And I'm only bringing this up because I actually quite like this song, and I already knew the song before I saw the episode, which is rare for me. 9 times out of 10, when a song plays in a TV show or a movie and I like it, that's usually where I discovered it. Because I'm not very good at discovering music unless it shows up in something. But this is one where I happen to already know. I think I know it because I want to say David Lynch had something to do with one of the songs on the album it's from, and I'm not necessarily big on the album as a whole, but I did like that song. So, yes, I just wanted to mention that. It's a good song, and it's called Revenge, so obviously, thematically, it ties in quite well with the episode. So, we'll talk about the flashbacks, and I guess we'll talk about Carter's plot as well, because that kind of ties in with them heavily. Reese comes back to the US, he discovers that Jessica's dead, there was a car accident, and then he goes and infiltrates the house where she lived with her husband and watches some wedding videos and things like that. And there's like a small moment where it looks like the husband was, being aggressive or telling Jessica off when no one was looking, and she had kind of this scared look in her face. But then it sort of like turned to, normal, happy married couple as soon as people sort of went up to them. And it's him sort of looking for the signs of what really happened here. But as, along with this though, we also get more flashbacks as Carter's discovering things about what went on here, investigating the car crash report, investigating the disappearance of the husband. It all kind of paints this picture where she's looking into this, and this all came up because some of Reese's DNA was found as part of the crime scene where the husband went missing. So, like, she's up there investigating that. Because, like I said earlier, she was going. Like, I think Finch was going to get her involved with protecting the woman who was involved in the main plot. But when he heard that, they're investigating this case, Carter should go deal with that instead. And she does, and she ultimately talks to Jessica's mother, She sees the injuries of the autopsy report and all that, and kind of deduces that some of these injuries might have been abusive. They might not have been just a car accident. There was more to it than that. But it all bundles up to when she's talking to the mum, and the mum mentions that Jessica used to have a different type, and Carter's eyes almost light up, and she starts asking questions about her ex-boyfriend, this soldier, because that was the real thing, is that she used to be with a soldier, and she's like, oh, do you have a photo of this man? And sure enough, she goes digging in Jessica's things and finds this photograph of Reese with Jessica. And it's almost like she knows his name by this point. At least I think she does. He's mentioned his name, at least one of his names, maybe not the full name. But she looks up his military record and actually sees who it is, and she could obviously give this to the FBI, because the FBI don't know the guy they're looking for. They still think he's just this mystery man who's an assassin for hire or something like that. But Carter shreds the information and all that, which notably, and I thought this was interesting because I watched this episode twice. And I don't usually do that, but it's because obviously I didn't have a review last week. I planned to. I watched the episode to record a review and then couldn't. So it'd been a week, so I had to watch it again. It was too long ago to sit and talk about it in depth. And I think in my head from my first viewing, I assumed that she shredded the evidence of who he was after she got the phone call from the prison telling her that Reese didn't in fact kill this guy, and that he isn't crossing that line, and she is reassured that he is, morally good and he is going to do the right thing. But she actually does it first. She shreds all this evidence first before she knows that. She's reassured after she takes the leap of faith. And maybe that's important for them as a pair of characters. When she stops Reese in the car when he's driving off with the guy in the back, he says, "You're going to have to trust me." And she's obviously not feeling very good about that in this moment, because it feels like he's driving a guy off to murder him. But he drives off, and I feel like this was almost like her being rewarded for trusting him. Like instantly, she got this confirmation. Again, the climax of this episode is very good. It brings all the plot threads together really well from all the different things going on. It's really, really well done. Yeah, that was that stuff though. It felt like a big deal, like Carter sort of like now knowing more personal stuff about John, and in a way that he's been this mystery man to her for a lot of the season. And even though she's been working kind of with him and started to trust him a bit over the last several episodes, this was like, okay, she knows something about who he used to be, who this man is, and maybe that'll strengthen that relationship going forward. So the main story, which is this woman who is the person of interest, what was her name? Sarah Jennings. She is just working as a barmaid, but she's looking over her shoulder. She's got an alias. So Finch is trying to deduce who is after her. And the Fusco's helping, but he loses her. So Finch tries to go and do some snooping around on his own. And when he's in the bar where she works asking questions about her, this guy overhears her, and this guy follows him out the bar, and it turns out this is a US Marshal. But then it later turns out that this is a US Marshal who is actually Sarah Jennings' husband, who is an abusive husband who is stalking her and using his position and job to sort of further that. Like he's basically falsified a bunch of crimes that she's committed, so that she's effectively been hunted by law enforcement for things she didn't do, so that they'll find her for him. He's using it as his own personal not hit squad, but you know what I'm saying. So this is a really interesting scene, because as soon as this guy starts following Finch out the bar, you're like, oh no, like no one's here to help Finch, he's on his own. And he comes up and starts asking questions, and it feels like, shit, what's he going to say? And it feels like he's stumbling a little bit. He doesn't have a good answer for anything he says. And then out of nowhere, Reese swoops in and pretends to be a cop. He's got a badge and says he's a CI and gets him out of the predicament. But immediately, it was a really good moment of tension before Reese showed up, though. But after that, he gets caught up in what's going on, who this person is, and that's where we get the explanation of the repeating numbers and these abused people who are living with their abusers and the person who might eventually kill them. And it does a good job of clearly implying what happened to Jessica in this scene without them saying anything outright. And Reese is pretty pissed that he was kept out of the loop on this. He wants to be involved. Arguably, he wants to be more involved in this than he usually does, because this does remind him of what happened to Jessica. So he does actually talk to Sarah briefly, but she ends up running away between scenes. Reese actually goes off the deep end, and he's so emotional about this, and maybe making a case for why Finch was right to not keep him in the loop for this one, is that Reese just walks into the US Marshal's office in New York City, goes up to him and starts fighting him, and then beats up like 4 US Marshals and threatens this man and says that he'll kill him. And that's another good little bit of the through line of this episode, is like, oh, they're all worried that Reese is going to go too far and just murder him in cold blood. He does technically threaten to murder him in this scene. So it sets up for the audience that he is maybe willing to do that. Obviously, he could also just be, trying to be scary because he wants to try and end it this way first. Obviously, it does not work. And he managed to get his wife when she's arrested at the train station, which, hey, shout out, I always say this show looks expensive because they're shooting around New York. There's always at least a few scenes where they're walking out on the streets with a lot of a crowd moving around them. Some episodes have more than others, but there's a couple of shots in this episode outside Grand Central Station, and it looked convincing. Maybe there was some trickery, maybe it wasn't really there, maybe it was a different road that's going up and they've just digitally put in the building or something. So they've shot it somewhere relatively busy, but then put in the famous bit down the line after in post-production. But it looked like they just shot in front of Grand Central Station, and I was like, oh shit, they got money here. Because I see that road getting into Grand Central Station, and I'm thinking of the big third act stuff in Avengers or something like that. Like, this is big movie stuff here. Reese tells Finch to get lost once he's managed to track down where the US Marshal's car is, and Reese goes off to save the wife from the US Marshal, which he does. Maybe you could argue, if you're going to try and really critique things, okay, you get one scene with the US Marshal and his wife, and maybe that scene, because we have to very, very quickly establish that he is saying that he loves her and he's promising to be better, but then gets angry and hits her in the same scene. It's a little bit quick, and it feels like it's very, very hastened for the sake of getting through it all in one scene. And maybe it doesn't help, the actors perform it in a natural way. Because I think the performances are solid enough. I think especially the actress playing Sarah Jennings does a really good job of acting like she's scared of someone who's after her the whole episode. But this scene, has to get through it all quite quickly. And arguably even the flashback where Peter the husband attacks Jessica, or not even the attack scene. It's more the scene where he comes in and she's been on the phone to Reese, and he's like, "Who are you calling?" And she's like, "No one's." Like, sounding like you were calling someone, and he sort of glares at her. Like, there's a few like maybe slightly hammy moments where they're really just having to emphasize the abuse rather than being subtle, because they have to just kind of get the point across quicker. Like, if I'm going to make any other nitpicks, it would maybe just be a couple of moments like that. But it's very tiny in the grand scheme of things, and we do have to get through it quickly so we can do the important stuff of the episode. And it's probably the only running thing that this show sometimes has, is that in the episodes where they don't have as much time to focus on the story of the person of interest and what they're going through, is sometimes some of the villains in those stories end up feeling a little bit two-dimensional or hammy. And some of them they don't, and some of them, because the episode focuses entirely on that, they flesh everything out. But sometimes when we're focusing more on our main characters, that stuff has to be kind of rushed a little bit by comparison. So this is just a tiny example of that in a couple of those scenes. So that and the dodgy beard are the two critiques I would levy at this. But Reese comes in, punches the guy out, tells her to go, that she's now safe, she's free to go do what she wants, and she goes off, and then we get the everything after that I've basically already talked about. So it's a very strong episode. It's a very strong episode for Reese. It's this connection between Reese and Finch, where Finch probably became aware of who Reese was and maybe picked him, I mean, I'm not saying he picked him, when he bumped into him, but this was how he discovered Reese and how he eventually decided this is the man that I should ask for help. This is the man that I should hire to be the muscle for this new thing that I want to do. It doesn't feel forced to me. Sometimes when you try and put connections into characters who weren't meant to have met before the start of the show, it can feel a bit retconny. This makes sense to me because they've established repeatedly throughout this show that Finch was paying attention to these numbers, and the idea that he became aware of Reese and his special abilities and looked into him because he was connected to one of the numbers makes all the sense in the world. It doesn't feel forced. It's not a big interaction where Reese should remember him sitting there, especially since he just found out the woman that he loves is dead. Like, he's clearly not going to be paying attention to some random passerby. All of it makes sense in the moment to me for what it is. And Finch has obviously always kept these cards close to his chest about how much he knows about Reese. This felt very natural that he did know about this stuff. Earlier in the episode, even when Carter first brings up this crime that happened in this other, town or whatever, he immediately has this look in his eyes. He knows exactly what crime she's talking about. He knows this is Jessica. This is the person who means a lot to Reese. So, yeah, that stuff is handled really well. And like I said, really sweet ending with the present Finch got him. An apartment's obviously a great gift. It's, I'd love a free place to live. By all means, Finch, give me a nice free apartment. But it's that moment where he looks down at the window and sees like the place he likes to spend his free time with this old man playing chess. It's this sort of like, hey, I pay attention to you. This is like a husband giving a wife a gift, but he's like, no, I've listened and I know you wanted that thing, and I gave you. It's very sweet, and I think the sweetness in the character relationships is one of this show's strengths. It tends to be a strength in a lot of good shows, actually, because you spend so much time with characters in a TV show that lasts multiple seasons, and you've got, even just in one season, you've got 20 plus episodes. You spend so much more time with these characters than you do with characters in a movie. So it makes sense that you really lean into their connections and their friendships and the ragtag family that seems to get formed in a lot of these types of shows, which I'm always a sucker for. Very good episode of Person of Interest. We got 2 left in the season. I'm excited to see where we go from here. And the other big thing that was revealed last episode is that Reese's handler, is now out in the wild in present day in New York. So I suspect that's something we'll be getting to in one of these 2 episodes, possibly both if it's like it's a over 2 episode thing. But that's definitely something we're going to be getting to. We dealt with the Jessica thing this episode, so we have to get to that next time, or maybe the finale if they're saving it for that. But let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. Of course, you can support all the content and keep all these reviews of all the different TV shows that I talk about coming by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there for however much you can afford per month. Every dollar helps, every dollar matters. One of the bonuses you get, $3 and up, is a monthly review of Columbo that I started a couple months ago. Episode 3 will be coming up in about a week or so, and I've been enjoying doing that. Plus, there's a bunch of bonuses for all the movie podcasts that I do over Mail Fuzz Movies with various other people. We have a horror podcast, a sci-fi podcast, and a sort of general franchise type podcast. Go and check out all those. If you want to listen to audio versions of all those, you can find all those in your podcast apps by searching for them individually. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?